A war film is a movie genre in which the story is focused more on a military conflict, or a soldier or a group of soldiers that are involved in a conflict and their evolution according to the conflict. When it comes to the premise of a war film, any military context from history can be used, but people associate the term of a war film almost all the time with any military conflict from the 20th and the 21st centuries. In the second half of the 20th century until the 1970s, a war film was set mostly during the days of World War II, in which different situations and missions were presented, from attacking a group of enemies to a certain special mission that will disrupt the enemy force somehow. Depending on the country and the historical time the film was made, a war film can present many ideas and many themes that will reflect military context as a heroic thing or as a place of no return, a place where men go to lose themselves in a horrific way, and if they return, they are not the same anymore. As I said earlier, back in the 1960s, most of the war films were set during World War II. One of those movies is the one I will talk about today in this video, called The Dirty Dozen. The story of the film is this: a major is tasked by his superiors to recruit, train and lead a group of 12 military prisoners in a very important and very secret mission. The film was directed by Robert Aldrich and has a great cast of actors: Marvin Lee, Charles Bronson, Ernest Borgnine, Telly Savalas, John Cassavetes, Donald Sutherland, Jim Brown, Richard Jekyll, George Kennedy, Ralph Meeker, Robert Ryan, Clint Walker, Robert Webber. The story was based on the 1915 novel with the same name written by Erwin Nathanson, novel that was based on the Filthy 13, a real-life special behind-the-lines unit demolition division from World War II. From the first look at the cast, you can clearly say it is quite an interesting one for the times the film was made. It had young actors and great action movie stars at the same time. It had that star power that made you wanna watch, and so many years later, with stars that became legends, the film became one of those that became a reference when it comes to classic war movies. There are many other war movies that could be more interesting, but when it comes to The Dirty Dozen, there is something that makes it unique in a way. Probably because of the way they represent rebellious characters. But I am taking it way ahead. Let's start a bit with the beginning. The story of the film. A major has to train 12 inmates for a dangerous mission in which they have to blow up a castle full of enemy leaders. From the first moments of the film, there are presented ideas of repercussions for a rebellious soldier. And by the looks of it, a major is not that pleased with the way the inmates are punished. Inmates that could be an important asset during the time of war. With a couple of seconds in an opening scene, Aldrich is creating a character that has some special traits on its own and unknowingly makes the viewer be prepared for what is coming. Now, the viewer subconsciously knows Major Reisman is the perfect character to control a volatile group of inmates that have no respect for authority, so the reveal that he will be the leader of this special group is not quite a shock due to its personality. So from this point on, one character is established. The others, the inmates, are starting to get known step by the viewer. You see who's who and what they have done. You see how unpredictable they are and how they are acting when it comes to anything that might be related to control. Their reactions and their personalities make the film move forward, and Aldrich knows that. Aldrich presents those characters for almost half of the movie in a way that makes the viewer sympathize and get familiar with them. You see who is the volatile one, who is the one who is just a loudmouth and starts to brag about anything, who might be an unpredictable problem. The viewer learns about them. It sees them as a bunch of misfits that start to act like brothers. You see they have their backs to each other and see them become a team. You even see them become loyal to Reisman, which is something quite out of nowhere, but it is understandable due to his training and the way he acts and talks with them. Aldrich presented those characters in an amazing way, and each and every one of them deserve to be analyzed and understood, because anyone is different and special and represent different types of, let's just say, issues like short temper or anger management and many other issues that made them to be criminals. But the way he presented them, like being this group of unpredictable dudes who, in the end, are there for each other, makes them to be seen by the viewer a bit like that group of bad guys, but who are cool after all, and end up being the bad guys that are gonna save the day. Earlier I said that for almost half of the movie, Aldrich takes his time to present those characters in an interesting and sympathetic way, which is true. Based on the way the film is structured, it might be said that there are two types of movies in this. The film has 2.5 hours, which is quite a lot of time to present the characters, to make the viewer get used to them, and to present the secret mission they have to accomplish. I have seen in other war movies from the 1960s moments that could be considered as comedic in order to cut the tension of the story, to make the viewer relax and enjoy the story in a more clear way, but the way The Dirty Dozen did it is quite a take from what I have seen. The first part of the film has a lot of comedic elements, to put it lightly. It reminded me of MASH from time to time, even though MASH was released 5 years later. The way Aldrich presents those comedic moments is not only to just make a comedic moment during a training session or to cut the tension or to accelerate the rhythm of the film. The first part of the film is quite light because it is made to give the viewer the same sensation of having fun, the sensation the characters have. You see the dozen laughing in certain moments or trying to mock the superiors. You see them revolt randomly regarding the cold water, an action that gives them the nickname the Dirty Dozen. And the most important moment that shows them working as a team, the training mission of infiltrating the colonel's base. There are serious moments here and there, but they are made to see the inmates becoming brothers, to see they have their back. And right after the training exercise, the whole vibe of the film changes and it becomes instantly serious. Aldrich starts to play with the element of suspense. He presents how the unpredictable characters is jeopardizing the whole mission. The tension of the battle is presented in a crescendo way, with different moments that show up out of nowhere. Technically, the whole film changes, which makes the viewer feel that. The first half of the film is felt like a nice breeze. The film's rhythm is so well made that you don't realize when the time flies. But the second part, the serious part, you really feel the pressure of the mission and of the context in a way. You truly are there with the dozen in their fight. I have seen this method used before in other movies. And I have to say that it feels a bit off here, probably because the serious part is presented equally with the comedic part. In the comedic part, I got to know the characters and I had to experience a lot of moments with them in a short period of time. But in the serious part, the whole context is the mission. Come to think of it, probably this was the best way because, as I said, Aldrich makes the viewer feel sympathetic towards the dozen. So seeing them in action and giving their lives for their mission is quite heartbreaking. Probably if the mission part of the film would have been a little shorter, it wouldn't have felt quite monotonous. But in the end, Aldrich's intention succeeded. He made you familiar with the characters, he made you laugh with them and see them for who they are, only to make you feel sorry they went on a dangerous mission with no way of returning for some of them. There is a thing that makes me feel a bit uneasy, and I took a lot of time to think about whether I should talk about it or not. I'm referring to a scene that probably might give a weird feeling of mercy, though not that much for the viewer to care about. The scene in question is the scene in which the enemies of the dozen are trapped in the bunker, and you see Reisman and members of his team throwing grenades and gasoline down the air vents. There is something with this scene that somehow made me question the film a bit. For the whole context of the film, you know who the enemies are, you know the context of the mission. That is fine, you understand this because the enemies from the film are the worst of the worst. But when the scene also shows women going with the enemies in the bunker, and then Aldrich is insisting to present to the viewer the reactions of the people from the bunker to see how they react to the dozen's actions, it might make the viewer feel uncomfortable. Why Aldrich is insisting on showing those moments might be to the interpretation of anyone. As I said, the viewer knows who the enemies are, so it understands the importance of the mission. But seeing civilians trapped in that bunker, civilians that are connected with the enemies, it might make the viewer feel remorse and pity for the civilians, or it makes the civilians guilty by association with the enemies. It is true, the only enemies who can be clearly confirmed as enemies are only the men, because of their uniform. But let's not forget that the dozen spared the butlers and the maids only if they were French. Also, one of the first victims of the mission was the woman that was killed by Maggot, giving a certain characterization to some members of the dozen. So maybe Aldrich is presenting a context that was blinded by the odds of the war, like anyone who is somehow attached to the enemy is the enemy, or is presenting also a side of the dozen who doesn't care entirely for the civilians, only if the ones who want to care, like the French butlers and maids. Maybe the scene wouldn't have a powerful impact on the viewer if only the enemies were present there in the bunker, so Aldrich may have wanted to powerfully impress the viewer somehow, but after all, Aldrich is presenting the film from the perspective of the dozen. In the end, their mission was accomplished, the castle was destroyed and the enemies killed. Who knows what the main reason for the whole scene might have been after all? To show the mission being completed, or to show the mission being completed in a certain way by the dozen? The cinematographic part of this film is specific to the 1960s American cinema. It is shot in a beautiful and clean way, made in a way to make the viewer pay attention to the certain moments of reaction from certain characters, or made in a way to create suspense and intrigue at the proper time of the story. It is done by the book, as the people would say. Aldrich even creates a powerful scene with a very powerful religious feeling in which all the guys are presented at the table right after the training scene that gives a powerful feeling of the Last Supper, a feeling that ultimately is fulfilled given the fact that almost the entire dozen fell during the mission. However, there is also a nice touch in my opinion in the way Aldrich is presenting the intro and the outro of the film. The intro of the film is not made to show up right at the beginning of the film, it is made to be assimilated by the action of the film. Aldrich does not pause the film to tell the viewer who is performing in his film, no, not at all. The opening credits are rolling with the film, and are rolling during the scene in which Major Reisman is meeting the dozen. Aldrich played a nice game here in my opinion. He didn't waste time to tell its story, nor did he present in a very elegant way the name of the actors. Even though they are not presented in the same order as they show up on the silver screen, Aldrich is making you as a viewer know who the actors are. He showed you Major Reisman, the first on the list of actors is Lee Marvin. He showed you the General, Ernest Bergnin is next on the list. Aldrich blurred a bit the lines here and kinda guided you through the cast of actors, but he did it in a subtle way, in a smooth way. As for the end credits, the way Aldrich did it, it felt a bit sad but honorable at the same time. Presenting the fallen members of the dozen and their images like in a medallion over the end credits, it felt professional, specific to a military file in which the major confirms their deaths. Even though it is short, the end credits give closure to the whole movie and the whole scenario. You know, I got a mission, so I will report the outcome of it. What I felt as a nice touch, even though it was the element that turned the whole operation upside down due to his problems, was that Maggot, who is the most volatile of them, who it looks the whole film as a crazy guy but not quite a big of a problem, and who it turns out is the one who started the whole chaos, is mentioned as a member of the team who fell in the line of duty. Even though it is the last on the list, it is still recognized as a member of the dozen, which is a nice detail. After all, he was part of the team and, one way or another, he did his part of the mission, most of it. So yeah, I have nothing bad to say about this film. It is filmed beautifully, it presents comedic moments when it is necessary, the suspense moments are made quite well, the intensity of the moment is presented perfectly, the fight scenes are credible and made that the whole battlefront is everywhere and the viewer has to pay attention in every corner of the battle to see what is happening. For a 1960s war film, it is pretty well made and I like that. It keeps me focused on the story, even though it has those rhythm moments that might make the movie slow from time to time. Wait, no, there is a bad thing that I can say. I don't know if this happened because of the way the film reels were made back in the day or the concept of the film was made like that, but from time to time, the film jumps suddenly from one scene to another. It is not a smooth transition or a transition that you can feel that ended the previous context of the scenes. It is more like the film was edited suddenly and moved on to another scene. It happened a couple of times, but I tend to believe that it was probably my digital copy of the film and I hope the film was not made like that. It's not a big deal, but I saw that happening and it was a bit weird, at least for the moment. The best example I have for this type of cut was the transition between the scene with the dozen and the women in their barracks, and then right after that is the scene when the colonel comes to the dozen's base to clean the place and to arrest the dozen. I hope it is nothing and it is just me, but those sudden cuts threw me off the road for a second. As a side note, I loved the way the story of the film takes a more important value with just one shot. The story of the film would have worked just fine with the context presented and the idea behind it, but with a simple line of dialogue and a simple shot of a paper, the whole story got meaningful for the viewer. Setting the date of the mission on June 5th, 1944, it automatically sets in the viewer's mind the importance of the mission. And if you know a little bit of history and you know what happened on the D-Day, I mean, obviously you would know because you are watching a war film, you subconsciously know the mission will likely succeed. However, leaving aside the date of the mission and focusing just on the context, I still think that the story of the film is pretty solid. The small addition of the date might look a bit too much, but taking it as a war film, I think Aldrich and the producers tried to log the story with a real-life event, to place the story in a certain moment of the war and to give the viewer the sensation of, hey, this thing might have happened and it was a very big deal. It's just a side note and a personal opinion, but I like this small addition. It makes the film more grounded, more important on so many levels in a way. There are many war movies out there that are made in an incredible way and had a powerful impact on pop culture and the future of cinema. And The Dirty Dozen is one of those movies. The film had a great cast of actors that in the 1960s were like the legends of action movies and TV series. If you were a fan of McHale's Navy, M Squad, The Killers, The Professionals, The Great Escape, Battle of the Bulge or Machine Gun Kelly, you definitely would want to watch this film when it was released. With a cast that became iconic, it makes sense for the film to become popular and become a great reference over time. The film's popularity spawned a series of sequels of TV movies in the 1980s and a comic book series in the 1960s, but was also the blueprint for other themes from the comic book universe. I can mention the Deadly Dozen, the Howling Commandos or the Thunderbolts for Marvel Comics, while for DC Comics the more accurate representation of the team is Task Force X, also known as the Suicide Squad. There are also other movies made that were inspired or considered a sequel, like the original The Inglourious Bastards, Michael Caine's Play Dirty or Too Late the Hero, movies that were released quite soon after the release of The Dirty Dozen. So you can say that with all those elements that were created and were inspired by this film, The Dirty Dozen was quite an impactful reference. And it was! It started a concept that became quite unpopular lately for the common audience with movies like the two recent Suicide Squad movies or The Expendables, and so many other films. Well, the concept became popular once more recently due to those comic book team movies, no doubt about that, but it is interesting to me to see where the idea came from initially. The Dirty Dozen popularized in a way this concept, and it was an interesting take during those times of cinema. Even after so many years after its release, the film still has its charm to make you want to watch it. It's a war film set in a time of great conflict in the history of the world, but it has its good parts. Whether it can be considered a blueprint for a team-up or not, there are other movies that were made before The Dirty Dozen that could be a good example, like The Guns of Navarone or The Lost Command for the young cinematographers. However, it can be sure that the film in which 12 inmates have to do a special mission during World War II is a film that is recommended up there as an example no matter what. I heard that in 2019, Warner Brothers announced they will remake the movie, so until then, I'm gonna watch this movie again and then see what is next on the watch list.